Hello techies, I'm Divya here. On behalf of CyberBrainer, don't you think the world of tech is evolving faster than ever? Now is the perfect time to dive in and build the skills that will take you places. With CyberBrainer, we are putting you in the driver's seat of your own future. We at CyberBrainer don't just teach your interest. We believe that knowledge is power, but it's applied knowledge that truly sets you apart. Whether you're diving into data science, mastering artificial intelligence, or exploring the world of cybersecurity, our courses are designed to give you the skills that matter. So let's jump into the session and make the future yours today. Thank you.
Whenever, I'll only join if I can quickly proxy. This was our derived dataset. This is the default join type. And then if I click on edit on this derived dataset, if you see, the default join type is always left outer join. If, for whatever reasons, you want to select a different join type, you can do that. Right, but by default the join type is the left outer join. Now this is fine. If I go back to my supervisory organization-based dataset, you'll see that here earlier, if I join the sector in my primary pipeline, which is the sector in companies. With the sector in the supervisory organization dataset, my base data is 0.2. But if I go back and look at this dataset, once again you'll see there are two sector type fields. One is here sector. If I can just expand it a bit. And then I also have sector fields. Once again. Now what is happening is these are basically these subtypes of an organization. In Workday, when you create any organization, you define a subtype for that organization. For example, your supervisory org, which is the organization we are looking at right now. It can be classified, for example, as a business unit or division or department or group project. A hub, basically to represent your organization structure, your enterprise structure. Enterprises are divided into these business units, various divisions, various departments. And that is what is identified as a subtype. For all of these organizations, if you see, the primary mapping that I'm looking for is these 4 or 5. Mobility, energy, company, life sciences. These are the different sectors of business units. You see the primary mapping that I have, which means I have my organization operating. But under these I have a number of other organizations which are either divisions or groups or departments, and on and forth. For example, if I scroll a bit to the right, asset and wealth management. This actually is a department under my energy sector. Now, when I've created this derived data set, I have only been able to identify my top level organizations and not those departments and divisions and on and forth. That's why if you see, my derived data set only has 9 rows of data. However, if I look at my actual supervisory structure, there are many more records. What I need to do is also do a join to see all of those organizations wherein this actually maps as well. For that, I'll create a new derived dataset. I'll click on Create the right dataset. Very similar to how we created this dataset, with the only exception that it would be mapped on. I'm again creating a derived dataset using company details as my primary pipeline, similar to what I did here. I'm going to create a new dataset for DD1 company details. Click on Select. The name I want to give is DDSO2. I want to assign it to the tag Gen5th. And let's see. Alright. My dataset is ready and it has all the company details. Now, similar to how I created my first dataset, derived dataset here as well. I am doing a join, but this time I'll not do a join between sector and sector. I will do a join between sector and this field. I want to add a join stage. I want to add a new stage, a join stage. Once again, similar to how I joined earlier. Here for joining, I'm adding another pipeline. And the pipeline that I want to add is Gen5th, the supervisory. Exact same thing that I did earlier. The only difference is I want to map sector field with sector_view field. That's the point where I am going to add a join. And the other thing is I want to add a join. I want to add a join. I'm selecting everything from here, except for those WPA fields. That means you are selecting one table with two joins. In one table, two joins with two different tables. One is sector bus width and one is with sector. I did a mistake. I by mistake took DS as a 1. Let me cancel this. Instead of B as 1, I took D as a 1. That's exactly what I'm doing. I took my primary pipeline as DDSL1. Once you have taken any primary pipeline, you cannot go ahead and change it. That be very careful. The only option is you can always change a secondary pipeline, but a primary pipeline cannot be changed. This is my second derived data set. The only option for me is to delete it. Here it was relatively simple because there was no subsequent lineage or dependency I had built. But if you have built a significant portion, then it will become difficult. Right? You will have to redo everything. This is what I actually wanted. I'm going to select DDSR1 company details as my primary pipeline. I by mistake selected DDSR1. That is the only reason. Again, I'm simply renaming it as DDSO2. I'm adding a tag and save. I would click on Edit. Add a new join stage. I want to join with another pipeline. And the second pipeline is supervisory organization. Basically what I did with my previous derived data set. The only difference set. The primary pipeline itself is automatically selected. Wherever you are saying the join one, whichever the table you are saying join on, it will let you select the secondary. Right? Your primary pipeline, that's why what you select as your primary pipeline is critical. Right? Because that's what defines how your join would happen, or your union would happen for that matter. Is there any logical diagram that will show us that this is joined to this table, this is joined to this table? It would show only at the lineage level. Let's if this, if you see, gives me many more records because here I'm joining at the B, O level wherein most of my mapping is happening. Now I have two data-derived datasets created. One derived dataset is DDSO1, which has the top 9 rows. And now I have created a second derived dataset wherein I have the remaining rows. What I need to do is club this together. Combine this together. What function do we use in SQL to combine two datasets or to combine two tables? Combine two tables. That's a great deal. You're joining or blending? Not joining, blending. What are you aware? You need to have your. Now I have, let's revisit. I created 3 base data sets, and then using base data sets O1 and ZOT2, we have created 2 derived data set. One is DDSO1, something we created yesterday, and now I have created DDSO2, right, which has all the remaining records. What I want to do is now, I want to club the data. When I say club the data, the first derived data set has 9 rows. The second one, let's say, has some 100 rows. I want to join both of those rows or add both of those rows, which will ultimately give me 109 rows. Right? And how do I do that? I do that using a union function or a union stage. Alright, what I'll do now is to create a new derived data set, a third one that I'm creating in here. I'm creating a new derived data set, right? I'm creating it using Gen5 DDSO1 as my primary pipeline. The moment I do that, I'll give it a name. This is my third derived data set. I'm calling it DDSO3. But then this derived data set has been created using existing derived data set. It exists at level 2. This is again a naming convention which is usually followed, which makes it easy for you to visualize things. Now, for example, you know that there are already 2 derived data sets. This is a third one. And then you note that this is at level 2 within the hierarchy, within the lineage, right? But as such, there's no fixed tool. You can select any meaningful name, right? I'm selecting Gen5. And now, when we look at the lineage, this would make a lot more sense. If I click on Edit, you'll see that this derived dataset I have created. It is based on DDSO1, something I already have open here. All the 9 rows of data from DDSO1 have flown into this DDSO3, but I also need to get data from DDSO2, the second derived dataset I created. Right, and I want to join those X rows with these rows. For that, as I mentioned, I would add a new stage, and the stage I want to add is a union. Join basically allows me to join rows from table A with rows from table, not columns from table A with columns from table B. A union, on the other hand, allows me to join rows from table A with rows of table B. The difference is join adds columns, union adds rows. I want to do a union. Again, I would have to select a secondary pipeline. My primary pipeline is already defined. I want to add another pipeline, and another pipeline I want to add is DDSO2, right? Something we just created. I am unioning DDSO1 with DDSO2 in the new derived dataset, DDSO3. And when I select this DDSO2, right, when I'm doing union, it basically checks the columns in table A with columns in table B, because Workday needs to know where a given column would join. It shows me the primary pipeline and all the columns in the primary pipeline. If I scroll right, my primary pipeline has company, Workday 8 sector, parent company, and it also shows me a sample of my secondary pipeline, which is DDSO2. And here, based on comparing these two tables, or these two datasets, or these two pipelines, whatever you want to call them, it says that this is the output, right? And the reason it has identified that is based on these columns. It sees that there is a perfect match. And then it proposes that to me. It says that the final output does it, Ravi. Does it? Done the union. On what basis? And done the union pipeline once I click on done it would. On what basis? That's what I'm telling you. It is based on these values. The company name here in my primary pipeline maps to the company name in my secondary pipeline. It is doing that union based on the column names. Right? It is basically comparing the primary pipeline with the secondary pipeline, checking which of the fields are in common, right? Here as well, if you see on the left-hand side, it shows me what fields are matched. It shows me that 11 out of 11 fields in the primary pipeline, they map to the 11 out of 11 fields in the secondary pipeline. And it automatically shows that mapping to me company name maps to company name. Company Workday 8 maps to company. If your column names are different, then you may have to manually select and map. Had the column name here been company title, just as an example, then Workday wouldn't have able to identify it, and then you would have had to manually select it. That is also possible. You can go in here and say, this is what Workday is proposing, but this is not the right mapping. It should map to this one as an example. And you can manually select that. These are the mappings, and this is the final name of my output table. If I want, I can change it instead of company name. For example, I can. But basically, Workday is showing me, this is my union output. Now, when I say done, because everything is perfectly alright, I accept what Workday has proposed, I'll say done. Now, when I say done here, it gives me the output of the union stage. If I click on import, this is the output of my primary pipeline stage. Now I have done a union. When I click on any stage, it gives me the data as of that stage. If I click on union, if you see the output of the union stage, is all of these records right? The same thing happens here as well. If I click on import, it shows me the output of my import stage. When I click on join, it shows me 9 rows. When I click on any stage in a pipeline, in a dataset, it shows me the output of that stage. Makes sense? Correct, got it? If I can quickly talk about stages, if I click on a line as a join, join. We've looked at two of these till now. One is a join and one is a union. We'll talk about other stages as well in more detail, but join and union, because you're already aware, I would not spend much time. Join. Join basically adds columns from two different pipelines, right? Which is two different data sets. And union, it basically adds rows from two different pipelines. But irrespective of your join or union, right? If you see any stage would always impact the number of rows of data, right? Even though when I'm saying a join adds rows, you see the end result of join is 9 rows of data. Earlier there were only 7 rows, and after join it has resulted in 9 rows of data. Whenever you add a stage, it may change the number of rows of data, which is the output of that stage. Having discussed that, now we can talk about stages in a bit more detail. As I mentioned, the output of the final stage is actually the output of the primary of the entire pipeline, right? Similarly, the output of the primary pipeline is the output of the entire dataset. The output of the final stage is the output of the entire pipeline. Again, what did I discuss? A dataset is a collection of pipelines. A pipeline is a collection of stages. If I come to this dataset as an example, this dataset has two pipelines. One is primary pipeline and additional pipeline. Each pipeline is a collection of stages. The output of the final stages, the output of the final stage is the output of that entire pipeline, and the output of the primary pipeline is the output of that entire data set. If you see, this is my primary pipeline. This is the final stage. This is the final output, and this is the output of this entire derived data set, right? The output of the primary pipeline is always the output of that entire data set, right? And therefore, and this is something we'll look at in more detail later, when you ultimately publish a data set. What is the publishing of a data set? As I mentioned, we'll talk about later the output of the primary pipeline. The primary pipeline will be materialized as the data in the Prism data source and used for doing or creating visualizations or reports. When you finally publish your entire Prism work, it is the output of the final data set which is converted into your data that would be available for analysis. And the output of the final dataset is basically the output of the primary pipeline of that dataset and the output of the primary pipeline of that dataset. Alright, having discussed that, now if I go to this dataset and look at the lineage, let's see how our lineage has changed. Actions dataset view. This would make things easy to understand. If you remember, we started with two base datasets. One was company details, the second was supervisory details. I basically joined both of them. I took the company details and then joined it to the supervisory details, which gave us our DDSO1. Similarly, I took the company details and joined it with supervisory details, which gave us DSILO2. And finally, I have created my DLSON3, which is basically a union of company details DDSIL1 and DSILO2. But as such here, it doesn't show you what you were asking for, whether this is a join or a union or any other stage. That is not possible. Right, for that, you'll have to look into that data set. It only shows you the interdependency between different data sets. Makes sense. It looks like I miss here somewhere. You said we have. These are the data sets, right? The middle ones are the data sets. The first two are the data, derived data. Last one is a data set. Last one is also derived data set, the data set. Everything is a data set. The only difference is the first two are my base data sets. I use these base data set to create two derived data sets. And if you remember, if this is one of those and I created one of them, you try to create it outside of the report, right? You try to create a derived data set because you want to take the data source as a different data source, not in the Workday, but ultimately I have not created yet that. I'll do later. That also will build that scenario. Don't worry. Whatever it is base data set, we can't use it anytime. We have to use a derived data set only for all transformations, modifications, or all transformation. If I go to this base data set as an example, this is my base data set. And if I click on edit, right, this is that supervisory org that I'm looking at now. If I click on add stage, you'll see there's no option to add a join stage or a union stage. I can only group by filter and manage fields. We'll talk about these stages as well, right? I cannot do a join, I cannot do a union. All those are only possible on a derived data set. On your base data set, you cannot do any of those transformations. That's the reason you have to make sure it's derived data set. And exactly that's why you have to create a derived data set. There's no other option. Really a different type of analogy, but then if you see, it makes things simple as well, because if you do everything at one place, then it becomes confusing, right? Now, anyone who's looking at it, he would be able to actually understand it. It is joining to these two sources and then joining. You are basically creating those modules. And this is how your programming also works, right? You create different modules, and in each module you do a single function. It becomes easy. Yep, yeah, I need to keep these two of the terminal, as you know. Exactly. That's why I mentioned go to the recording, because once we keep adding, then it would become confusing. Just moving the data, just like that, into other data table. And the other thing is we are building on a single example, right? If you don't understand one bit of it, then you would keep missing all the other bits. Every bit is based on. We'll keep adding to this example, and as part of this, we'll understand all aspects of Prism. You should be going through the first example, and then you would understand all subsequent sessions. This is my final data lineage. Till this point in time, however, if you remember, I had created 3 base data sets, not 2. Here I have only used 2 of them, right? If I go back to my data catalog, excuse me, if I go back to my data catalog, if you see, I have created 3 base data sets. One is B7 company details, which is what I'm using here. Then I created B702 supervisory details, which is what I'm using here. And then I created a third one, which includes my worker details. Now, that is something I have not used till now. Till now, I have only used these 2 base data sets. Let's quickly see what is there in this third base data set. We have already seen that this basically includes the worker details. This data set, or this base data set that we created on our day 1, it includes our individual worker details. It shows me, for example, this employee Logan Neal, whose it is 201, belongs to this supervisory organization, right? And then it also shows all the other aspects of this employee data set that we have been able to create. Now, if I look at my final derived data set that we have been able to create till now, if I click here, this includes my company details, and in each of those companies, for example, in Europe, if I see here, these are the different supervisory organizations, right? In Europe, there are a number of supervisory organizations. Now, these supervisory organizations that I have here can now be mapped to the workers that I have here, because to each of these supervisory organizations belong my workers. Now I'll do another join, and this time I'll join this final derived data set, which has all of my companies and their included supervisory organizations. And then within that supervisory organizations, I also want to understand how many workers are there. For that, I would join this DITSON3 with my base data set, which has the worker details, right? I am in this DITSON3 now, which is this one. I would click on edit. Now I'm going to make use of the third base data set that I had created. I want to add another stage, and this stage is to join this derived data set with this base data set, which has the worker details. I would copy text, add another pipeline, and the pipeline that I want to add is the BSON3 worker details select. And how am I joining them? We have already discussed that I would join based on the supervisory organization my worker belongs to, which is basically this one. I want to join the supervisory organization name in the primary pipeline with the supervisory organization name in the worker details, and then, just for the purpose of fail to, every supervisory org, or in fact every object, is associated with a unique aid, which is known as the weight or Workday aid. Right? I can have two supervisory organizations or two objects with the same name. For example, I can have two employees who are known as Logan McNean, but obviously their employee it would always be unique. Right? I can have multiple workers with same name, but their aid or their username is unique. I would add another join condition same, not just name should match, but also their associated it should match. Right? I could have directly done this only on it, and that should have also been fine. Again, the default joint type that is selected is the left outer joint. I want to select all the fields of my primary pipeline and from my secondary pipeline. I want to include all the fields except for the supervisory org name and the Workday aid, because this is something which is, in which way, is coming from the primary. Sorry, questions. No, it's just repeating. I just said it's just repeating. I don't have to do that now. If you see, once I save this, and look at my lineage once again. If I refresh, alright. Now this derived dataset, I have also joined with my third base dataset, right? This is how my final structure looks. It was showing as a DES1 under DSO1. Only you have created this join, right? Can you go back to there? I was looking at the 005 DSO1 here. Oh, it below primary pipeline. I was seeing here, right? My primary pipeline for this DSO 3 is still DSO1. Right? Because this DSO3 I created using DSO1 as the primary pipeline. Then I unioned it with DSO2, and then I have joined it with DSO3. This dataset contains three pipelines now. DETSON1 is the primary pipeline, and then I have unioned it with DETSON2, and now I have joined it with DETSON3. These are all my go into the pipeline. I don't show us it's a join or it is anything, but if you see the outside layer, it will show me that it is a union or a join. Correct. This is where, when you go to a pipeline within pipeline, we are adding stages, right? A dataset contains pipeline, and when you click on that pipeline, that's where you see those stages join union. What is happening? But if you change pipeline, when I click on change pipeline, it won't tell me that. Is it a union or is it a join or anything? It's just kill a name. It only shows me it's imported and joined. But it is grayed out. Obviously, I cannot refer it from here. If I click here and then click here, it shows me there was a join. The pipeline has been joined. But that is something I can always see from my primary pipeline itself. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel.